The Express by Robert C. Gallagher. Narrated by Paul Boehmer. Copyright 1999 by Robert C. Gallagher. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Bartleby Press, an imprint of Jackson Westgate, Inc., care of Alan O'Shea Literary Agency, and was produced in the year 2008 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. A Remembrance. In my 21 years of playing football, I received over 150 trophies and plaques, but I keep only one in my office: the Ernie Davis Memorial Award from the coach's All-America game. The plaque itself has a picture of Ernie and was given to the player who best exemplified his qualities. To this day, I can vividly recall how impressed I was by Ernie. We first met when he visited my home in New Haven, Connecticut, with Coach Ben Schwartzwalder to recruit me for Syracuse University. I remember his size and how well dressed he was. We went to dinner, and Ernie took me aside. He briefly mentioned football, and then emphasized the importance of an education. He said I would receive an academic scholarship which would guarantee my education as long as I maintained the academic standards. "I haven't done badly," he said, "for a guy who didn't have a dime." That conversation is how I remember him. My entire family was impressed by him. My mother said, "If that school graduates a person like Ernie, you should consider going there." My 3 sisters fell in love with him. In a letter, he wrote of how much he enjoyed meeting my family and mentioned each of my sisters by name. I was also being heavily recruited by the University of Notre Dame. In fact, I had committed to the Fighting Irish. I have a newspaper article with the headline, "Little Goes to Notre Dame." I was reluctant to admit it to Ernie, however, and led him to believe I would go to Syracuse. When Ernie died, I felt obligated to fulfill my promise to him. I called Coach Schwartzwalder and told him I'd be coming to Syracuse. It was one of the better decisions I ever made. So many people loved Ernie at Syracuse because he spread so much love. He didn't have to be loud or the center of attention. You just knew he was there. As a collegian, I felt a tremendous responsibility to hold up the tradition Jim Brown and Ernie established. Every Syracuse student learns that tradition. It was a great honor to be mentioned in the same breath with them. Every time I put on the jersey number 44 that we all shared, I thought about them. They were the best. It motivated me to prove I was worthy. Courage was Ernie's outstanding quality. To excel as an athlete, you have to play with pain. There is a difference between pain and injury. An athlete has to deal with pain. Put a Band-Aid on it and play, is the credo. The only way they can get you off the field is by hiding your uniform or by dragging you off, kicking and screaming. Ernie exemplified that determination throughout his life, particularly while fighting against leukemia. He never quit. Since Ernie's death, I have been involved in many ceremonies honoring him. The first intercollegiate football game I ever saw, Ernie's mother presented his Heisman Trophy to Syracuse University. When he was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, during a game at Meadowlands Stadium, Jim Brown and I escorted his mother onto the field. Whenever I've seen her throughout the years, I've made a conscious effort to represent Ernie and try to emulate his qualities. Today, there is a need for heroes. The pressure and challenges of life may seem overwhelming, particularly to youngsters. Heroes like Ernie Davis provide inspiration, incentive, and direction. His life strongly affected all who knew him. His life story will touch you. Floyd Little. Background. A young man's first hero often remains more sharply etched in his memory than his first love. Mine was Ernest R. Davis, who in 1961 became the first black football player to win the Heisman Trophy. He died of leukemia 18 months later without fulfilling his dream of playing professional football. Despite the tragedy of a life cut short, his story is more than a cheers to tears heartbreaker. Although fans recall an athlete and his achievements, friends remember a man and his character. I never met Ernie personally, yet throughout my life, by chance, coincidence, or the reminiscence of a mutual acquaintance, I would often recall his memory. I became a fan of his when I was 10 years old, playing football in the backyards, fields, and streets of my neighborhood. Like many other boys my age, I dreamed of being an All-American, a Heisman Trophy winner, and even an All-Pro. I lived in the Northern Virginia suburbs of Washington, D.C. The big college star of that time was Joe Bellino, All-American halfback and Heisman Trophy winner from the United States Naval Academy, only 40 miles away in Annapolis, Maryland. We neighborhood boys used to vie for the honor of playing Joe Bellino in our pickup football games. I don't remember why we wanted to be college players rather than professionals. Possibly the pros hadn't yet earned the popularity they now enjoy, or maybe the college players were closer to our age. One day, when another boy called Joe Bellino first, I said, "Okay, I'm going to be Ernie Davis of Syracuse." A playmate shouted, "You can't be Ernie Davis, he's a nigger." Then to everybody else, "He wants to be a nigger." I answered, "He's an All-American," which to me was a comeback of unassailable logic. I can't honestly say I was morally indignant. I was embarrassed. I had never experienced bigotry and didn't understand it. I wonder why a person could dislike someone because of their color. Stubbornly, I stuck with my choice. Months later, I discovered why the boy acted the way he did. In December 1961, we interrupted our football game in that same kid's yard to watch the Syracuse-Miami Liberty Bowl game on television. Ernie and the Syracuse team played poorly in the first half. As we went out to throw the ball around during halftime, my playmate, remembering my earlier statement, said, "I told you Ernie Davis wasn't any good." "He's a nigger." My embarrassment increased when his father said, "None of those niggers are any good." While we were outside, I silently prayed, with the fervor only a youngster praying for a hero can muster, that Ernie play well in the second half. With trepidation, I went in to watch the rest of the game. As if in answer to my prayers, Ernie played magnificently in the second half and rallied Syracuse to victory. At game's end, in righteous indignation, I asked, "What do you think of Ernie Davis now?" My friend's father answered, "He's still a nigger." I didn't respond, but I secretly gloated at the man's discomfort. At that time, Washington sports fans were eagerly anticipating watching Ernie play with the hometown Redskins, who had ostensibly made him the #1 selection in the 1962 National Football League draft. I was disappointed when it was later announced that Ernie, in fact, had been traded by Washington to the Cleveland Browns prior to the draft. After weighing offers from both the Browns and the Buffalo Bills of the rival American Football League, Ernie signed a then NFL record-setting rookie contract with Cleveland. However, his professional career ended before it began at the college All-Stars training camp. I remember my disappointment when it was reported that Ernie would not play in the annual exhibition game due to illness. Later, the newspapers described his condition as a blood disorder, which would prevent Ernie's playing during the 1962 football season. Although I'm sure that privately he was devastated by the news, publicly, Ernie never changed. For months he had been signing autographs, Ernie Davis, Cleveland Browns, 1962. Despite the setback, he never gave up hope that he would overcome his illness. 8 weeks later, there was some good news. Ernie Davis had leukemia, but it was in total remission, and as long as the remission held, the doctors said Ernie could play football. According to the newspapers, the Browns' management was divided over whether he should play. Ultimately, Coach Paul Brown chose not to activate him. During the winter of 1963, Ernie's leukemia returned, and within 4 months, he died. One can imagine the crushing disappointment of the young athlete when he learned that his battle with the disease had not been won. By all accounts, his fears and disappointments remained a private agony. To the outside world he turned his usual confident, smiling face, betraying not a hint of concern about his health or his prospects as an athlete. John Brown, Ernie's teammate at Syracuse University and roommate in Cleveland, scoffed when asked what it was like to watch a young man die. "I don't know," he said. "I watched a young man live." Ernest R. Davis, 23, died of leukemia on May 18, 1963. The courage and dignity Ernie showed in facing death stirred a city and a country. In one day, over 10,000 people filed past Ernie's coffin as he lay in state in his hometown of Elmira, New York. Thousands attended the funeral, which was sadly one of the biggest events in Elmira history. Certainly anyone who was there will never forget it. President John F. Kennedy sent Ernie's mother a telegram of condolence, which read, "I would like to express my sympathy to you on the occasion of the death of your son. I had the privilege of meeting Ernie after he won the Heisman Trophy. He was an outstanding young man of great character who consistently served as an inspiration to the other people of the country." I never heard much about Ernie Davis after his death until I enrolled at Syracuse University 4 years later. There, I met people who had known him. I was intrigued listening to their anecdotes about what a great person he was. They rarely talked about him as an athlete. At a freshman orientation lecture, Dr. Michael O. Sawyer, a university vice-chancellor, described his last encounter with Ernie Davis. 2 weeks before his death, Ernie visited the campus and called Sawyer to arrange a visit. The professor, aware of the gravity of Ernie's condition, was concerned about how to talk to a young man of such extraordinary ability and potential who had only a short time to live. Sawyer's concerns proved unwarranted because Ernie controlled the conversation by asking about Sawyer, his plans, and mutual acquaintances. He didn't allow the professor to feel uncomfortable. 18 years later, Sawyer was still impressed by the stylish performance. He said, "In those circumstances, most people's concerns would have been totally centered on their own illness or their own problems, but he was so sensitive to other people. He was always interested in others and their well-being. I was always impressed by him." Since graduating from Syracuse University, I continued to have unexpected reminders of Ernie Davis. In the fall of 1979, a former classmate invited me to the Syracuse-Penn State football game at the Meadowlands Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. We didn't know that during halftime ceremonies, Ernie Davis would be inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. The emotional induction and the subsequent newspaper stories gave me a few more memories. Still more unexpected was a chance encounter with a coworker on that Monday following the induction ceremony. Hearing me speak about Syracuse, the lady volunteered that she was from Elmira, New York. Since that was Ernie's hometown, I idly asked if she knew who the Elmira Express was. She responded, "You mean Ernie?" Incredulously I asked, "Did you know him?" She answered, "Of course. Everybody in Elmira knew Ernie. He was a terrific guy." I decided to find out if it was true. To satisfy my curiosity, I began reading the old newspaper and magazine stories about him in the local library. It quickly became apparent that Ernie Davis was a young man of extraordinary character and courage, as well as athletic skill. I felt his story deserved a wider audience. I began contacting those who knew him, some well and others casually. They had similar impressions and used the same descriptive words: concerned for others, self-aware, modest, leader, and great sense of humor. They all willingly took time from their busy schedules to discuss their feelings for Ernie. They often said, "I'm really busy, but I'll do it for Ernie." You might expect such reactions from friends, but hardly from those in athletics where fame is ephemeral and an athlete's only as good as his last game. Ernie's last game was 20 years earlier. Although those close to him obviously remember his athletic skill, it is as a person that he is most vividly remembered. His high school football coach, Marty Harrigan, said Ernie Davis was more than a jock. He was something really special. He loved his fellow man and wanted to do things for him, do them quietly, and do them by example. Tony DeFilippo, his lawyer and advisor, emphasized it was always what he could do for the other guy. Everyone who knew the truth about him would say the same thing. Mention Syracuse University, and sports fans inevitably recall such football stars as Jim Brown, John Mackey, Jim Nance, Floyd Little, Larry Kasonka, and Joe Morris. I always added Ernie Davis, and they would nod and reply, "Too bad he died. He would have been great." That observation missed the point. Obviously, his untimely death was tragic, but the ifs of Ernie's life were not as important as the whats and hows. Through his concern for others and his self-confidence, particularly as he faced death, Ernie Davis was a greater hero than he ever would have been as a professional football superstar. In his final months, Ernie experienced the emotional high points and low points of his life. The personal courage and dignity he demonstrated were remarkable. As in all endeavors, Ernie did his best to overcome leukemia. When he couldn't, he didn't curse the fates. He was thankful for what he had attained. His roommate, John Brown, who played 10 years in the NFL, remembered one of the few times he ever saw Ernie angry. He had taken a date to the movies, and while they were standing outside, a man asked, "Are you Ernie Davis?" Not wanting to invite attention, he said, "No." The stranger stated, "You're lucky. Ernie Davis has leukemia. He's only got 6 months to live." Shocked by the man's callousness, Ernie confronted him angrily and said, "I am Ernie Davis, and I'm going to live." When he came home to the apartment, he told John Brown what happened. Ernie couldn't get over the guy saying something like that to a stranger, recalled Brown. He said, "I didn't want to embarrass him, but it might keep him from being cruel to someone else." If willpower alone could cure cancer, Ernie would have been cured instantly. He had overcome obstacles before, and he firmly believed he could in this case. When it became obvious he would not, Ernie wrote an article for the Saturday Evening Post magazine titled, "I'm Not Unlucky." It was a striking testament to his courage. Without the least trace of self-pity, Ernie steadfastly maintained that he was a fortunate man and that his accomplishments were their own reward. Tony DeFilippo, who negotiated his record professional football contract, was visiting him in Cleveland when the leukemia returned. They were riding in a taxi, and a book fell from Ernie's coat pocket. The title was Burial Masses. Despite his fierce determination to live and his unfailing confident public demeanor, Ernie obviously had a clear perception of the gravity of his condition and was determined to face it. He did so with tremendous personal courage and his characteristic concern for others rather than himself. A few weeks prior to his death, Ernie visited friends in Syracuse and Elmira. The day he checked into the hospital for the final time, he visited the Cleveland Browns offices. He never said goodbye, but when he died soon afterward, everyone realized that had probably been his intention. Elmira lawyer Jack Moore, a high school basketball teammate, recalled the last time he saw Ernie. Despite his condition, Ernie maintained a buoyant attitude and sought to reassure others. They went to a local restaurant, and as always happened wherever Ernie went in Elmira, a crowd gathered around the table. The young waitress, on recognizing Ernie, began to cry because she had read and heard he was dying of leukemia. Ernie patted her on the hand and smiled. "I know they have me dead and buried, but don't worry. I've got this thing licked. I feel great. I'm looking forward to playing football this season." The waitress began beaming, and we all felt better. He convinced us. When he died a few weeks later, It was obvious he had been well aware of his condition. It was important to him to make the waitress and the rest of us feel better, no matter how he felt. Ernie's concern for others was a natural outgrowth of his own self-confidence. He knew where he was and where he was going. Although he achieved tremendous athletic success, he never allowed his fame to dominate his life. Former high school and college teammate Bill Fitzgerald remembered, Ernie had at an early age what others didn't get until their 70s, wisdom and understanding. People came to him because he was strong and never turned anybody off. Conversations about his athletic accomplishments were always initiated by others. Ernie understood the fans' interest and was patient in responding to their inquiries. Unlike today's braggadocio-style athletes, he never felt compelled to talk about himself. Once, at a party in Cleveland, someone introduced him to a young woman as Ernie Davis, the Heisman Trophy winner. She responded, "So?" Instead of being offended, Ernie laughed in agreement. He spent the remainder of the evening talking and dancing with her. Ernie gave evidence of his inner strength and concern for others, even in his youth. No one interviewed could give an explanation of why Ernie had these characteristics. They simply said, that was just Ernie. Whatever the reason, the impression was lasting. John Brown named a son after him, and Ernie's mother was the child's godmother. He said, "I hope both my boys grow up to be like Ernie." Syracuse University football coach Ben Schwartzwalder, who coached hundreds of young men during his 25-year career, said of him, "I never met another human being as good as Ernie." Part of growing up is realizing that childhood heroes, whoever they might be, older relatives, public figures, athletic stars, are still human beings. Save for an extraordinary ability or quality they possess, they are subject to the same problems, fears, failures, and worries that affect us all. Ernie Davis was not superhuman. All those interviewed were careful not to portray him in exaggerated terms, but they clearly saw something in him that they recognized as out of the ordinary. The fact that his peers recognized these qualities and struggled to find words to describe them was particularly impressive. They dwelt on his courage, his personal warmth, and most of all, his feeling for others. They acknowledged his human failings, and they also admired his humane character. These characteristics were conveyed in many different ways by relatives and friends. In addition to information, they provided an almost tangible sense of the psychological and emotional environment that shaped his life. Although a disparate group, they were united in their admiration for Ernie Davis. It was easy to get to know him through them. One of the first people interviewed was Ernie's mother, Marie Fleming. She seemed to be wary at first and, before consenting to an interview, asked a number of questions about my motives. We met in her comfortable home in Elmira. Ernie was meticulous in appearance, and after visiting his mother's home, it was obvious that she was the influence. Trophies, plaques, and photographs of Ernie were clearly visible. Mrs. Fleming was tall and younger-looking than expected. Unaccustomed to being interviewed, her initial answers were short, but as the interview progressed, she relaxed and became more expansive in her responses. At the end, she recommended interviewing her brother, Chuck Davis, and Ernie's friend, John Brown, both of whom were invaluable. Chuck Davis proved to be an important source of information about Ernie's childhood, because of Ernie's and Mrs. Fleming's height and the fact that Chuck had been a college basketball player. A tall man was expected. But he is short and powerfully built. He looked like he could still play a good game. The interview took place at his office in Lower Manhattan, where he was a liaison for special services for children in direct child care. We met in a conference room, and the extension cord for the tape recorder did not reach the outlet. Chuck and some co-workers searched until they found a cord long enough. Not nervous or wary, Chuck was completely relaxed and made the interview seem like old friends talking. He has a great sense of humor and an engaging laugh. His whole body would move in his chair as he stomped his foot or slapped his hand on the table. Normally, a single 2-hour cassette is sufficient for an interview, but we went through 2 cassettes and talked for an additional couple of hours. I had already missed my scheduled return flight by the time we left his office. Chuck accompanied me to the lobby, where we continued to talk, while office workers walked between us on their way home. We finally broke up when the head of the crew buffing the lobby floor said, "Let's go, fellas, I've been working around you for over an hour." Chuck went on to an NAACP dinner. I scrambled to find another flight home. John Brown, another important source of information, is a big bear of a man. You would immediately assume he was a former football player. When he walks upstairs, you know it. Non-football players take a step at a time, putting one foot on each stair. Former football players like Brown, who have had knee operations, step with their good leg and bring the bad leg up to the same stair each time. As many others would, John gave long answers to my questions. They were monologues. One recollection would quickly lead to another. He didn't seem to hold anything back. The affection John had for Ernie was obvious, and there was no inhibition about expressing it to a stranger. This was particularly striking due to the tough guy image of football players. John's recollections were also impressive because they were of Ernie as a man. His only short answers were to questions about athletics. Tony DeFilippo was interviewed in his office in Elmira. Then, in his 70s, he was a grandfatherly figure. He made you feel that he had taken you into his confidence. In a conspiratorial tone, he'd say, "Turn that tape recorder off. Fix that one up a little bit." It was obvious that if the wheeler-dealers in professional football dismissed him as a small-town lawyer, they were mistaken. Ernie's record contract attests to that. Tony could not recall the exact name of the church where Ernie's funeral service was held. He asked his secretary, who thought it was a Baptist church. She came in with the yellow pages, and they found what they thought was the church. Tony grabbed the phone and called to confirm it. He made recommendations of others to contact and said, "If you have any trouble, give me a call." I never had to take him up on the offer. Last to be interviewed was John Mackey, Ernie's roommate for 3 years at Syracuse before a Hall of Fame career as a tight end for the Baltimore Colts. His wife, Sylvia Mackey, who attended Syracuse with them, also participated. We met in their large Spanish-style home in California. As a former president of the National Football League Players Association, who led the first pro football strike, Mackey has a formidable reputation. It's unwarranted. John Mackey is an interesting and humorous man. He laughs easily, and he doesn't just tell a story, he performs it. Mackey characterized the difference between college football players of his era and today's. He also gave insights into Ernie as an athlete. He pointed to the large window in his living room with a view of the snow-capped San Gabriel Mountains. When Ernie and I played, if the coach told you to run through that window, you'd run through that window. Ernie would run through that window and probably have perfect form. Today, guys would ask, what's running through that window got to do with playing football? Sylvia Mackey provided a feminine perspective on Ernie's college life. After pondering for a time, she said, "I'm trying to recall some story about Ernie, but I can't." Ernie was the nicest of all the athletes. He carried himself well. He was most respectful of the girls. Eventually, she remembered an incident. "Ernie had this nice orange sweater," she said. "One day I saw him wearing it while walking across campus, and I told him how much I liked it. He asked if I wanted it. I thought he was kidding, so I said yes. He took it off on the spot and gave it to me. I wore it to all the games for good luck. I still have it in a trunk. I should get it out." It was a pretty sweater. Ernie's impact extended beyond family and friends. While writing this book, I met people who knew Ernie only casually, yet retained vivid memories of him. One person who was from Elmira spoke warmly of his childhood days and of being coached by Ernie Davis. Another was a classmate of Ernie's at Syracuse University. He recalled the influence Ernie had on the campus. A woman who had been a secretary for the Cleveland Browns when Ernie signed with them recalled his strong personal relationship with the team's president, Art Modell.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?